Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. Today, we are going to discuss the 2020 Resource Allocation Review. I am Sarah Rush, and I'm a school improvement specialist at the Indiana Department of Education. I'm joined by my colleagues Graham Collins and Diane Veely. The email you see on the screen, srush1@doe.in.gov, is where you are able to direct questions throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to answer each one following the webinar. Again, the email is srush1@doe.in.gov. As outlined in the memo in Dr. McCormick's weekly update on July 17th and July 24th, and the email that LEAs separately received on July 24th, the Resource Allocation Review is required by ESSA. ESSA outlines how IDOE will periodically review district resource allocations to ensure school improvement efforts in LEAs with one or more comprehensive support and improvement, CSI, or additional targeted support and improvement, ATSI, schools are adequately leveraging resources to promote equity and excellence for all students. As I mentioned earlier, IDOE sent out an email on July 24th to each LEA identified for the Resource Allocation Review. The email was sent to superintendents, and it included a few different documents. First, there was a memo that outlined the Resource Allocation Review process, which we are going to walk through today. There was also a Google Sheet that included data on per pupil spending, staffing, and access to advanced coursework in high school for analysis. Advanced coursework includes the number of AP, IB, and CTE courses for each high school. LEAs with one high school are exempt from the advanced coursework portion of the Resource Allocation Review. We wanted to provide each LEA with as much data as possible so that districts did not have to pull all of this data on their own. Finally, LEAs were sent guiding questions that corresponded with the data. These guiding questions asked districts to evaluate how resources are allocated to CSI or ATSI schools compared to higher performing schools in the district. Along with the data sent by IDOE, LEAs will need to gather and analyze their access to high quality pre-K and out-of-field teachers for each school in their district. This data is due to IDOE by September 18th, 2020. Guiding questions will also be due at this time. Again, the guiding questions are asking you to analyze the data and compare CSI or ATSI schools with higher performing schools in your district. You will send both the data and guiding question responses to Diane Veely at dveely@doe.in.gov. And that email address was included in the email sent to superintendents on July 24th. After LEAs have sent over the data and guiding question responses, IDOE will schedule a resource allocation review call with each LEA. IDOE will contact superintendents to schedule this 1-hour phone call to complete the review process. During this call, 2 IDOE representatives, as well as the superintendent, will review LEA data as well as the responses to the guiding questions. Superintendents may bring a business manager or additional staff member to this call. Following the phone call, IDOE will provide the LEA with a report including recommendations based on the guiding questions, data, and phone call. These will be evidence-based recommendations. We will also provide support as requested by the LEA. We are available throughout the year and we want to support you in any way possible. One important note is that if a school is contracted with an approved technical assistance partner or TAP, that TAP may act as the designee and work with IDOE throughout the review process. I'm now going to turn it over to Graham Collins to walk you through the data portion.
Here you will see an example of the data that has been sent out to LEAs from the 2018-2019 school year. You can see all of the schools in the district listed on the graphic. The CSI and ATSI schools are highlighted in yellow. During the call with IDOE staff, LEAs will discuss the reasons behind any inequities and LEA strategies for improvement. You can see in the example that the majority of the LEA's CSI and ATSI schools receive fewer state, local, and federal funds than their higher performing schools. During the call with IDOE, the LEA could share strategies for increasing funding to their lower performing schools. In the next dataset example, you can see that this LEA, generally speaking, has fewer inexperienced teachers in their higher performing schools. During the call with IDOE, the LEA could share strategies for increasing the numbers of experienced teachers in their lower performing schools. For this dataset example, the LEA has more ineffective teachers in their lower performing schools. It appears that their teacher evaluation system is effective in that they have evidence that their lower performing schools have more ineffective teachers. The LEA should discuss strategies for transferring or hiring effective teachers to these schools or improving professional development, induction, retention, and mentoring programs for these ineffective teachers. The final data example shows an LEA with multiple high schools, including a combined middle high school. The lowest performing school has an average number of opportunities for rigorous coursework for students. Not every data example will show a need for an allocation change. Thank you for participating in today's presentation. Now we have some information from Larry DeBoer, Purdue University Professor of Agriculture and Economics.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm happy to be with you. This is Larry DeBoer. I'm a professor in the Agricultural Economics Department at Purdue and an extension specialist on state and local government policy. And that's why I know something about Indiana school resources in recession. And, we're going to talk today about the state budget and about the property tax. And I think state aid to schools plus the property tax makes up maybe 90% of the revenue that school corporations receive in Indiana. And so once you've covered these two, you've got the information you tend to need for how the recession is going to affect the local schools. Well, let's start with the state budget. And I'm sure you've seen this pie chart before, but here it is again. This is Indiana General Fund appropriations for 2021. And so this is the budget. And that's the part of the budget, the part of spending by the state that the legislature debates every 2 years when they set the biennial budget. It doesn't include everything. It doesn't include federal expenditures, revenues for Medicaid. It doesn't exclude road construction that comes out of the motor fuel taxes, but includes just about everything else, including K through 12 education. And what you can see on this is that total appropriations are $17.5 billion. And of that, half is K through 12 education, and of that 17.5 billion, 43% or $7.5 billion is aid to local schools. So most of the K through 12 budget is aid to local schools. If you add K through 12 education, higher education, and Medicaid, you've got more than 3/4 of the total. Well, the fact that K through 12 education is half of the budget is a problem, because it means that usually anything that happens to revenue, that is any revenue shortfall that the budget might see, puts K through 12 education and aid to local schools in danger, because that's where the money is. And one thing to remember is that the state, and every state, has to balance their budgets. The states are not like the federal government. The federal government can borrow as much as it wants, and people are clamoring to lend more. States are not in that position. And of course, we have an amendment that we just voted into the Constitution, putting an even stricter requirement for balancing the budget. So if revenues fall short, spending eventually has to go. And if spending has to go, well, K through 12 education is where the money is. Now, the governor has pledged not to cut aid to K through 12 education, if at all possible, and managed not to, asked for budget cuts from everyone else, but not K through 12 education in 2020, and has pledged to continue to do that in 2021. And the question, of course, is whether revenue collections will allow him to continue to do that. And we're also going to want to look at, hey, we're going to write a new budget next year for fiscal years 2022 and 2023. What's that going to look like coming out, hopefully coming out of the recession? Well, here's a chart of actual revenue compared to budget forecast revenue all the way back to 1996. So what do we got? 25 years worth of data up here. And this is the comparison I like, and I think it's the most important comparison to make. What this is a comparison of the money, the amount of money that we expected to receive when the budget was written to the amount of money that was actually received. And, you know, rather than looking at how revenue is changing from one year to the next, I like to make this comparison because when we write a budget, when they write the budget next year, they're not going to know how much revenue is going to be available, and yet they have to plan appropriations. And so what they do is make a forecast, a revenue forecast. And if revenue meets the forecast, then we can spend all the appropriations that we said we're going to spend, provide all the services that we plan to provide. But if revenue falls short of forecast, then maybe we can't do that. Maybe we have to cut the budget. And so what you see here is all the bars below the line are the years in which revenues fell short of the forecast. You see the recessions, the recession of 2001 and the following years, and the Great Recession of 2008 and 9 and the following years. And you can see that revenues fell short of forecast by up to 10% during those years. And here in 2020, we just finished, we fell short 8%. And so this recession shaping up to be about as severe as the recessions that we saw back in 2001 and in 2008 and 2009. Now, if you take a look at 2021 there, you see an upward pointing bar, short one. That is not realistic at this point. We haven't got any more information than that right now. That reflects the difference between the December forecast, the forecast revision done last December, and the April forecast of last year, which was the one that was done right before the budget was written. So we were doing fine in December, coming in ahead. The plan is to do another revenue forecast, a special forecast revision in September, I believe it is, and then we'll see. Then you'll see a big downwards focused, downward shaped bar that will reflect a shortfall of revenue, because undoubtedly revenue will fall short of forecast in 2021. Well, how do we pay for the budget when revenues fall short? One way we pay for it is to draw on balances, the state savings account. And so here's balances. This one's all the way back to 1976. I do love a long time series. Boy, it just tells a story, doesn't it? And what it is the balances as a percentage of revenues, of total revenue. So it's just indexes balances to the size of the budget, essentially. And you see that purple stripe across there labeled prudent range, and that's our state budget agency's idea as to how much they would like to have in balances, just in case revenue falls short. And you see the green line there at 5%. That's kind of the rule of thumb minimum, or the rock bottom minimum. And that's how much you have to have in order to pay your bills on time. That's the cash flow minimum that we actually have to have. And as you can see, we've never really fallen below that cash flow minimum here in the last 45 years. So Indiana adheres to that. Usually, historically, as far as the prudent range is concerned, we're only in the prudent range on the way up or on the way down. But we spent most of the last decade just above the prudent range, but now we have sunk below it. We started out with about 13.5% of revenues in balances, and that's about $2.4 billion. And we spent $850 million of those balances to cover appropriations that we couldn't fund with revenues. And that puts us down to about 9% of revenues. And we still got about $600 million to go. That is, before we hit that 5% minimum, there's still a $600 million cushion against revenue shortfalls that are still to come. Well, okay, so we've managed to muddle through 2020 without cutting aid to schools, and the hope is that we can do it in 2021. What happens after that? And what I've done here is to put together an illustration. That's all it is just a scenario based on a few assumptions that you see listed up there about how revenues and appropriations could look in the coming biennium 2022 and 2023. And you see what happens if you take a look at those two recessions we looked at. You can see the green line is revenues, and and how it turns down in 2001 and 2002, and then turns down again in 2009 and 2010, and creates these gaps in between the appropriations, the red line, and the revenues, the green line. And that's a gap that's a deficit for the current year. And that gap has to be filled in with balances as long as you've got them. And budget cuts, reversions, they're called. That is, when we spend less than appropriations than we're legally allowed to spend in the budget, the money reverts back to the general fund balances, and so they're called reversions. And so when the governor says we're going to cut the budget, we're going to ask state agencies to spend 15% less than appropriations, that's what that is. He's calling for reversions. Don't spend what you're legally authorized to spend, and that's what he spared K through 12 education in 2020 and hopes to do in 2021. Well, you see the gap that opens up here in 2020, and what would it take to get back to balance by 2022? And what I did here was assume that between 2022 and 2023, we began to grow at the same rate that we grew when we recovered from the Great Recession. That's 6.3% per year, and that's pretty rapid growth. We recovered pretty well, revenues did in 2011 and 12 and 13. You can see that green line there shooting upward during those years. And so they got the same slope there from 2022 to 2023. The trouble is, until then, we're short of appropriations. We're short of current appropriations. What you see in 2021, that peak right there, is what we've budgeted. That's that $17.5 billion. And in order to get to balance, even by 2023, we're going to have to cut the budget, even if revenues grow rapidly. And that means that the budget negotiations, the budget writing next year, is likely to involve talk of cutting the budget from where it is right now in 2021. And I've got a 3% cut in there for 2022, as you can see the downward slope on the red line. And if we have to cut the budget 3%, that probably means that state aid to schools will be at best flatlined and perhaps cut as well. Of course, it's just a scenario. Maybe we recover faster than that. When they keep a good thought, maybe the recession will end quicker and the economy will bounce back. But likely is not. Next year is going to be a tough budget, and the fiscal years 2022 and 2023 budgets will be tight. So what can we say about the state budget? Revenue fell short of budget forecasts by $1.3 billion in 2020. Balanced budget in 2020. We balanced the budget in 2020 with about $850 million in balances and $450 million in budget cuts. And those are the two avenues we've got for covering a revenue shortfall. Revised revenue forecast for 2021 will show a large shortfall. I did a sort of stress test on the budget and decided that if the shortfall is greater than 8 to 10%, then it's going to be hard to avoid additional budget cuts. That is, we get by with the 15% on state agencies and no cuts for K through 12 if the shortfall is less than 8 to 10%. If it's greater than 8 to 10%, then we're going to have to look at more budget cuts, and, well, what happens to K through 12, we'll see. So that's something to watch, because one of the numbers that will be publicized when that revenue forecast revision comes along is how far short of forecast, the previous forecast revenues from the December forecast, how far short of December forecast revenue is the new forecast. And that'll be our rule of thumb measure as to what the capacity we've got for funding the budget as we wrote it for 2021. We'll start for fiscal year 2022 with expected revenue less than current appropriations and few balances. The stress test I ran for 8 to 10% implies using up all of that $600 million in balances that remain. And so we'll be starting that fiscal year with hardly anything in the bank. The biennial budget would have to be cut under most reasonable assumptions as to what might happen to revenues in the economy. I always like to have a reason for optimism. Economics is the dismal science, and we earn that reputation, I'm afraid. But is there a reason for optimism? And there is. Will Congress provide general revenue aid to the states? During the Great Recession, Both the Bush and then the Obama administrations provided aid to the states, general revenue aid. That is, here's revenue just to fill in the revenue gap. It was $2.2 billion over 3 years. And again, I ran the stress test, and I think we can muddle through the next several years if we could get as little as $2.5 billion from the federal government in general aid, just to fill in losses in sales and income taxes. The House passed such a bill with a lot more money than that, as a matter of fact. And of course, the Senate is still struggling to try to figure out what to do. So if this Congress or the next Congress, because we do have time to fill it in before the end of our fiscal year, if this Congress or the next Congress provides some several billions in general revenue aid, oh my goodness, that would help a lot. That would really help a lot. So we'll see, at least a possibility that the federal government will come riding to our rescue. Okay, so that's the dismal news about the state budget. What about the property tax? Now, historically, the property tax was the most stable revenue source of all, right? Sales taxes respond with the losses of revenue when people simply buy fewer goods. Income taxes go down when people become unemployed and don't earn the income they were paying taxes on. But the property tax is based on assessed value, and historically in Indiana, we hardly ever reassessed. So a recession came along and assessments didn't change. Furthermore, the assessment system we used didn't have much relationship to market values. So even if a recession actually did reduce the values of property, our assessment system wouldn't catch it. Well, as of 2003 and then 2007, we've changed all that, and we've now got a modern assessment system for the 21st century that does respond to recessions. So let's take a look at how that happens. And here's, we went with the new market value in use system for pay 2003, and then in 2007-8, introduced trending, which means that we adjust assessments every year for changes in selling prices of property and construction costs of property. And so the recession of 2007, 8, 9, the Great Recession, was the first and so far only recession that we have information for as to how our property tax would respond. And the black line that you see on this rather complicated chart, the scale for that black line is the right-hand vertical scale. And that shows the percentage change in statewide gross assessed value. Now, gross assessed value is assessed value before deductions are subtracted. And so it is the best measure of what assessors think is happening to the volume and value of property. So what happens in recession? Well, new construction goes away, purchases of equipment slack off, and the value of property, selling prices of property tend to decline as well. And boy, that really did happen during the Great Recession, of course. And twice, in 2011 and 2013, statewide gross assessed value actually fell and hardly increased at all in 2012. So the recession was felt. But of course, the recession was 2007, December 2007 till the middle of 2009 was the mark, how the recession is marked, the declining phase of the recession. And then real estate markets continued to react in 2010 and 2011. Why the lag? Well, here's something to remember. This is important, and I'll bet most of you know this. And that is, if we have a recession, when we have a recession this year here in 2020, if construction lags, if equipment isn't purchased, if property values go down, that will be assessed in 2021. So what happens in the economy in 2020 is in the assessed values of 2021, and that will be the basis of tax payments, tax billing in 2022. So the recession here in 2020 will affect the property tax in 2022, which gives you, what, a year and a half to plan, I guess. But we're looking forward to that. And what it means is that the impact of the recession will affect school budgets and local government budgets generally for several years after the recession is over and the recovery has begun. The green and red bars that you see there are just the count of the number of counties that saw declines or increases. The red bars are how many counties saw decreases from one year to the next in gross assessed value. And 2013 was the worst year, almost a full 1% decline in gross assessed value statewide, and 54 of the 92 counties saw decreases in gross assessed value. So almost every county saw a decrease in at least one of the years 2011, 12, 13. So declining gross assessed value, definitely a possibility in recessions. Now, every recession is different, and we may see some real differences this time. The Great Recession was caused initially by a crash in housing markets, a big drop, especially on the coasts, but a big drop in home values. That's not necessarily always something that happens in recessions. And so far, the price of housing in this recession has not declined. Of course, it's very early in the recession, and we don't have good data on it yet. But so far, so good as far as home sales and home prices are concerned. So maybe this recession will be different. On the other hand, maybe it'll be commercial real estate this time. It's the restaurants and the office buildings that will go begging for rental customers, and the rents will go down and the values of those will go down. So we'll have to see. But the warning is, yes, it is indeed possible for the assessed value of property to decline in our market value and use with trending assessment system. Here's a map of what happened in 2010, 2013, and all of the red counties are the counties that saw a decrease in gross assessed value over that period of time from 2010 to 2013. You can see most of the urban counties are included there, and quite a few suburban and rural counties as well. However, you also see quite a few rural counties from Pulaski to Warren up north, and from Sullivan to Spencer down south, that saw continued increases in gross assessed value of 3% or more. And maybe you remember, but what was happening back then was the value of farmland was going up, and our assessment was catching that. And it's from 2007 to 2014, the assessed value of farmland went up about 75% altogether. And that was happening during the recession. So the recession was hitting the economy like crazy, but not agriculture. Agriculture did quite well in 2007, 8, 9, 10. Well, that's not going to happen this time. This time, the assessed value of farmland is going to go down as well. And so that saving grace for rural counties from the last time won't be present this time. So we can add, one of the things that I do is make forecasts about what's going to happen to the assessed value of farmland. That's why you've got a state and local guy in the College of Agriculture, and it's absolutely certain that the assessed value of farmland is going to go down over the next couple of years. Here's a leading indicator. So how do we tell? How could we guess what might happen to the assessed value of farmland in coming years? And I looked for some leading indicators, and by leading indicators, I mean indicators that will show in advance, will lead something that's going to happen in the future. And this is the last 12 years of growth in gross assessed value, that's on the vertical axis, and then building permits, statewide building permits per household with a 2-year lag. So if in 2020 building permits were down, that would be captured in assessments in 2021. And that would affect tax billing in 2022. So a 2-year lag, what happens to building permits this year should affect budgets, tax payments 2 years later. And as you can see, it's a pretty good fit for economics. Anyway, the dots are pretty close to the line, and the trend line there, you see the equation. And what it says is that building permits are an indicator of what happens to gross assessed value. That's an especially good indicator of what happens to housing construction, of course. But what happens to housing construction within a community will often be reflected in other assessments as well. If nobody's moving in, if nobody's building houses, if people don't have the wherewithal to build houses, they probably don't have the wherewithal to buy goods and services, and businesses may not be expanding and that sort of thing. So at least over the last 12 years, a pretty good indicator as to what might happen 2 years later to gross assessed value. So the question is, what's happening to building permits right now? We get this data monthly, and you can get it on the county level too, by the way. So that might be something to watch. You can get it from Stats Indiana, actually, the IU's statistics or data base that they have online. And so what's been happening to building permits? Well, here it is. This comes from Fred. This one does. That's Fred is Federal Reserve Economic Data, and it's a very nice website that everybody in economics uses now from the St. Louis Fed. And if you look off all the way to the right there, you see the building permits were actually quite high, the highest they'd been since before the Great Recession at the beginning of this year. But then the recession, and that's the gray bar there, the recession came along and they really dropped. But in June, they recovered again. And they recovered back up to, again, the highest level we'd seen since before the Great Recession. So you can see during the Great Recession, the enormous drop in building permits from 2006, where we were at 2.8, we're at 2,800 per month is what that is, all the way down to, 450 per month at the depth of the recession. Well, nothing like that has happened yet. So there's at least some reason to think that maybe housing won't be affected. Mortgage interest rates are the lowest they have ever been, and that's got to help. So maybe we won't see a decline in building permits. Maybe assessed value won't respond as much as it did back in the Great Recession. Well, the other thing that matters for the property tax is the maximum levy growth quotient. And as school business people know now, the maximum levy growth quotient determines how much your property tax, how much your operations property tax can increase from one year to the next. That is, if you're taxing at your maximum levy, which I believe most local units are, that will tell you how much. And it's 4.2% for 2021, so you're allowed to raise the levy by a good amount, the highest amount, in fact, we've seen in more than 10 years at 4.2% coming up. Well, the reason for that is that the maximum levy growth quotient is based on percentage increases in Indiana income. So we take a 6-year average of Indiana income increases, and that's the percentage that you can increase your property tax levy. Now, the trouble with income is boy, it really responds to recession. And if you take a look at 2009, you can see that income went down by about 2.5% altogether. And 2 years later, again, another 2-year lag, that was incorporated into the maximum levy growth quotient. And you can see the red line there dropping from 4% in 2009 and 3.8 in 2010, under 3%. And it remained under 3% from 2011 all the way out to 2016, when in 2017, that big negative number finally dropped out of the 6-year average. Is that going to happen again? That's the question. Well, we would kind of expect to see income fall with the unemployment rate up over 10%. Surely income is going to fall unless it doesn't. And here's the crazy thing. Back in April, the national personal income release that the Department of Commerce did showed the biggest increase in income, monthly income ever. It was a 10% increase from one month to the next. Now, how did that happen? It was the CARES Act. That extra $1,200 per person that they sent out, that extra $600 in unemployment insurance added to personal income. And one thing to remember is that the personal income number we're looking here, it's Indiana non-farm personal income. That's not taxable income, that's just total income. So if the Congress gives folks money, that is included in personal income, and that would mean that personal income doesn't fall as much. And if personal income doesn't fall, then the maximum levy growth quotient won't fall either. And which means that here's another way that Congress will affect what Indiana schools can do with their budgets. Now, the question is, what could happen in 2020, and how might that affect future maximum levy growth quotients? The thing about the maximum levy growth quotient is that it's a 6-year average, so we already know 5 of the numbers for the next calculation. We already know what 2021 is going to be, so we're trying to look ahead to 2022, and that's when the 2020 income number will be included in that 6-year average. So we know 5 of those numbers. What would happen if we had any kind of different number for non-farm personal income growth in 2020? So if you look at the horizontal axis, those are all the different possible personal income growth numbers, all the way from plus 4%, and I put minus 20, which would be a depression. And then what would be the maximum levy growth quotient in 2022 if you had this number added into the other 5 numbers that we already know? If we saw a 2.5–3% decline like we did in 2009, you can see that the bars go up to 2.7 to 3%. And that would be a drop from 4.2 in 2021 to 3 or 2.7 in 2022. So that's the kind of drop that we saw for the 6 years after the Great Recession. And it means that slower growth in the levy, in the maximum levy. If, on the other hand, we don't see a decline in income, if income grows more slowly than usual, and 4% is the average over the expansion, if it grows just 2%, then we're down to 3.7, not much different than 4.2. So some reason for optimism, remembering that we count the federal aid to individuals, unemployment insurance and CARES Act payments, we count that as part of personal income when we calculate the maximum levy growth quotient. Now, here's the other problem. Okay, what about the tax caps? And here's another rather complicated chart, so let me talk you through this one. What I did here was to take the change in the tax rates from 2018 to 2019, which at the time was the most recent data that I had, in each taxing district. And as you may know, a taxing district for the property tax is a combination of the county and the township and the city or town, if there is one, and the school corporation and the library district. That adds up to a particular tax rate. Right? And there's about 2,000 of these districts across the state. So on average, is maybe 25 in every county. And most school corporations will be in more than one taxing district as you overlap different other units. Part of your school corporation may be inside a city or town, part of it might be outside a city or town, and the taxpayers in those areas pay different total tax rates. Now, your school tax rate is the same, but what we're talking here is what happens to the total tax rate. And we're using that because that's what matters for the tax cap credits, for the credits that people get if their tax bills come in above the constitutional tax caps. So it turns out that if your tax rate goes up, you are more likely to hit your cap and get a credit. And when there's a credit, that is when taxpayers are told, no, you don't have to pay your full tax bill, you only have to pay the capped amount, the local units don't collect that money, and those are tax cap revenue losses. So what happens to revenues, to property tax levies, the amount collected from the property tax when the tax rate goes up? So if you take a look at that top line, if the tax rate in districts where the tax rate went up by 20 cents or more, that's 20 cents per $100 assessed value, it matters. What matters is, what was your tax rate to start with? All right. Now, if your tax rate is less than $2, it means that hardly anybody in your school district, hardly anybody in the taxing district is eligible for a tax cap credit. And an increase in the tax rate will leave people still not eligible for a tax credit. And so hardly anything happens. Hardly any tax cap credit increases, hardly any tax cap credit losses. So if you're in a taxing district with a rate less than $2, your property tax revenues are probably safe. You'll get to raise your levy by the maximum levy amount, and there won't be any legal reason, at least any tax limitation on the amount that your taxpayers will have to pay. However, if your tax rate is above $2, and especially if it's above $3, and that would mean you're in a city or town, then the revenue losses from increasing tax cap credits can be rather large. A 20-cent increase, as you can see, for the gray bar, and that's with tax rates between $2 and $3, could reduce or could increase tax cap credits by almost 2%. If the rate starts at more than $3, the reduction could be more like 2.3%. And if we're talking about an increase in the maximum levy of somewhere between 2 and 4%, that could subtract quite a bit from the total increase in the levy that you can experience. It has happened occasionally that tax cap credits have actually reduced revenue received from one year to the next. That's unusual, but it can happen. So why would your tax rate go up? Well, if your levy goes up more than your assessed value, then levy divided by assessed value is the rate, then your rate goes up. So if your assessed value goes down, and the maximum levy goes up and you tax at your maximum levy, it's quite possible that you can push your tax rate up by 2 or 3 or 4 or 5%. And if your tax rate is starting at $3, 5% is 15 cents. And so the tax rate can go up by those larger amounts. Now, so you can take a look at this chart and at least take a guess based on what happened in a recent year with changes in tax rates and the effects on the tax levy. So that's how the property tax is vulnerable to the recession. It's vulnerable in a sense in 3 ways. Assessed value can be affected, the maximum levy can be affected, and tax cap credits can be affected. So assessed value can decline after recessions as property values fall and new construction is diminished. We saw that in the last recession. Jury's out, of course. We don't know what's going to happen in this recession. Maybe we'll see some more of that. Maybe we won't. Property value declines in 2020 will be assessed in 2021 for taxes in 2022. We've got some time before the recession really hits, at least the property tax share of local budgets. Home building permits have been a 2-year leading indicator of assessed value growth, but it's unclear what will happen to home building during this recession. It's been up and down, both down and up in this recession so far. The length of the recession, how the virus goes, will probably determine a lot of that. Maximum levy growth quotient could fall below 3% again if there's a drop in non-farm personal income, and the jury's out on that as well as to whether non-farm personal income will drop like it did the last time. If the levy rises more than assessed value, tax rates rise. Local units in districts with rates above $2 are vulnerable to tax cap revenue losses, which could eliminate much of any levy increase. And that's the real vulnerability that local units have to recession in our property tax. And of course, this is the piece of the property tax that we now have that we didn't have before, that even in the last recession, we didn't have the increase in tax cap credit revenue losses that will occur if assessed value grows less than the levy. Reason for optimism, again, with Congress. And there's other reason for optimism. Maybe home building won't decline. Maybe assessed value won't be affected. But the real reason for optimism, I think, will Congress support personal income with added CARES Act style aid? And of course, again, the House has passed a bill and the Senate is still working on it. And it's unclear at this point what will happen. But remember, any of that aid is included in the personal income number that is used to calculate the maximum levy growth quotient. Well, there you go. That's what it looks like as far as the budget is concerned. That's what it looks like as far as property taxes are concerned. As it turns out, I write a column every month. And the last 2 columns that I wrote, it's called Capital Comments. The last 2 columns that I wrote had to do with the recession's effect on the state budget and the recession's effect on the property tax. So if you want to, if you really liked what you heard here, or really didn't like what you heard here, but want to read more about it, it's right there. And you can see it's on the Ag Communications website. If you Google Capital Comments DeBoer, you'll undoubtedly find it. Well, that's what I have to say. During the last recession, I tried to develop a reputation for being really enthusiastic about giving the news about recession so that people would walk out of the meeting feeling good for no reason at all. And here we are back again with another recession. Where's the recession going to go? That depends on the virus. The sooner we get rid of the virus, the quicker the economy can recover. Until we get rid of the virus, the economy will not recover, or at least not fully recover. So that's what I have to say. Thanks for listening. Happy to be with you. I'm Larry DeBoer.
Thank you all again for tuning in and joining us today as we outline the resource allocation review process. And a special thank you to Larry DeBoer for his recap. Again, if you have any questions related to what he presented, you can email him at ldeboer@purdue.edu. He's more than happy to answer any questions that you may have, and thank you again to him. And again, if you have any other questions, please feel free to send them to any of the names on the screen. I know it was a lot of information, but I'm going to turn it over to Diane Bealey right now.
Thanks, Sarah. I sent out emails on July 24th that contained links for the memo, the guiding questions, and your data. And unfortunately, we had a technical issue with the link for the guiding questions. So I will be sending another email out today with a fresh link. We've corrected the situation, along with the YouTube link so you could re-access this presentation if you had any further questions. Sorry for the confusion.
Yes, and in that email, we will also be sending this YouTube link. So if you would like to rewatch it at any time, if you have any other questions, you can refer to that as well. We also received questions about the format. So we obviously sent the guiding questions in Google Docs, and we sent Google Sheets for the data. We are very flexible with whatever format works best for you when you send those back to us by September 18th. But we just ask that if you do use Google, please ensure that we have access to view those. And then if you choose to send them as attachments, that works for us as well. But again, if you do send those back in Google to us, please ensure that we do have access. I'm going to turn it over to Graham now to answer a few more questions.
Okay, and we had some questions come in during our presentation. So our first question we received was, I received my data from the IDOE. Some of the schools are highlighted in yellow. What does that mean? So when the school is highlighted in yellow, that means they are a CSI or an ATSI school. Question number 2, can you recap the timeline for me again? Yep, so the guiding questions and any additional data sources that you want to send to us are due on September the 18th. The calls that we are going to be having are going to be scheduled for October and November. We anticipate having the reports ready in December and January to send you guys. Shortly after we send them out, we'll have a webinar that highlights statewide trends as an option for anyone who's interested. Okay, the next question is, who all should participate in the call that's coming up this fall? So there will be 2 IDOE staff members that will be part of the call. We would like superintendents from the LEA to be part of the call as well, and then they can bring an additional staff member. We think most likely a business manager, a treasurer, or a federal grants program administrator, but really you guys can choose who else to bring to the call if you would like to have someone in addition to the superintendent. Next question. My neighboring LEA received their data with some information about AP, IB, and CTE courses, but when I received my LEA's data, it did not include this information. Why is that, and do I need to provide information about access to advanced level coursework? So only LEAs with multiple high schools that are both CSI and non-CSI or ATSI receive this data. This was a very small number of LEAs. So if you did not receive this data, which would be the vast majority of you, you're exempt from this portion of the review. And if you did receive this data and have some additional data sources that you would like to send us to let us know about your students' access to advanced level coursework, then you can go ahead and send that to us alongside your guiding questions. And then just checking to see if any more questions are coming in.
I believe that we answered all of them. If more arise, we will get back to you individually. And again, I know that this was a lot of information, so feel free to email any of the emails on the screen if you have any further questions regarding this process, and we're here to support you in any way possible. But thank you again for tuning in.